I'm Emma Norris, I'm the Director of Policy and Politics at IPPR, and this panel is all about how government can support good business whilst delivering on growth. So I'm going to start by doing some brief scene setting. The government has set itself a clear mission to raise living standards in every part of the country while reviving economic growth, and we know that business is going to be absolutely central as to whether that mission succeeds or not. Now, ministers have been clear that growth has to come in partnership with business. It has to create conditions where investment can thrive, and it's worth remembering that the UK has consistently had the lowest level of business investment in the G7, so it's going to be a hard task. The fiscal rules, the 10-year industrial strategy, the National Wealth Fund, and the Clean Power target for 2030 should all be seen in that context, trying to give businesses the certainty and the stability that they need to grow, and especially in sectors that we see as central to Britain's future. But we also know that growth isn't just about numbers in a chart moving in the right direction. Translating economic growth into higher living standards depends on good, productive jobs and stable employment opportunities. So that's what we're going to be exploring today. Is the government creating the right conditions for firms to grow? How can business help deliver the infrastructure, the jobs, the technologies that the country needs? And what does a good model and partnership look like between government, between business and between workers, one that aligns private enterprise with the public good? I've got a brilliant panel today to discuss this. Kate Dearden MP, the Minister for Employment Rights and Consumer Protection, Louise Helen, the Chief Economist at the CBI, Mike Clancy, the General Secretary of Prospect, and Richard Bogle-Hanson, the Director of Regulatory and External Affairs at Orsted. So we're going to start by having a bit of conversation amongst the panel, some opening comments, and then I'll make sure we leave lots of time for audience questions. So Kate, I'm going to come to you first. You've just taken on the Employment's Right brief. Talk us through your thinking.
Thank you very much, Emma, and it's really good to be here and see you all, so thank you so much for having me. IPPR has played an important role in shaping the serious debate about the economy, and this conversation comes at a really good moment, and obviously I've just been in the job for the past couple of weeks, but I'm very, very excited to take up this brief of employment rights and consumer protections, and it's absolutely central to our agenda for growth all across government, and the department is absolutely determined and relentlessly focused on that. For a long time, the UK has lacked that clear and long-term direction that businesses need. Too often policy has been short-term, and that uncertainty, of course, makes it hard for businesses to invest with the plan of the future. Our approach is different. We believe government should set that clear, stable framework and work in genuine partnership with business, with trade unions, to deliver that sustainable growth. That, of course, means setting priorities, building those strong institutions, and rewarding that long-term value rather than short-term gain. A key part of that approach, a key part of that intent of my brief is the Employment Rights Bill, which we have now introduced, and that is the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation, something I'm very, very proud about and very excited about. It's a foundation for a modern and secure labour market, and it's a significant piece of legislation, an essential part of our New Deal for working people, and delivers on the promises we made in our manifesto at the election. I won't go through all parts of the brief because we simply just don't have time for that and the bill, but it brings in those basic rights from day one, ending exploitative zero-hours contracts and strengthening so many protections. And we've also been really clear that we'll take employers with us as these changes are put into practice, because that's absolutely key in getting this right. This is a pro-worker and pro-business agenda for that reason, and many employers already meet these standards, and we will interfere from these reforms. The aim isn't to do that and to create new burdens, it's to give that fair treatment at work and to give businesses the stability and clarity that they've been asking for. And we've worked really carefully to balance those robust protections with, of course, the practical realities that many employers face and told us about. We've got loads of work to do over the coming year as we've moved to implementation stage, and obviously at the moment we're focused on that boiler ascent, which I hope we'll get to very, very soon, because this is about building a modern economy where fair work and business success goes hand in hand, where people have that security and a proper voice at work, because productivity improves, staff stay longer. I think it's talked to all businesses about the importance of that, and because performance is stronger too. And it's about raising that floor and raising standards, making sure that those responsible businesses aren't undermined by people who cut corners and by businesses who cut corners. Alongside that, our industrial strategy, which is really key to all our work that we're doing in the department. It's not covered in my particular brief, but really, really important and overlaps in so much of our work across departments and across governments, because that will give businesses the long-term crowds they've been calling for. It's been very welcomed by so many, which is brilliant to see, from energy usage, infrastructure, skills and planning. Because we want Britain to be a place where businesses know that government will stick to our strategy and not chop and change every single year. Because the task now is to rebuild that serious long-term relationship between government, business and working people, and that's social partnership is something that I'm really passionate about, and I think is a really refreshing approach of how we actually, the vision that we have for our economy and for our future is how we'll create a more productive and a more resilient economy, one that delivers for people all across this country. And this Employment Rights Bill is the foundation, it's not the finish line. We know the world of work is changing and continues to change, and we're committed to keeping those rights up to date and working in partnership to deliver that. Because our aim is simple. How can we build a Britain where work means security, it means dignity, it means decent pay? It's good for business, it's good for workers, and it's good for both. And I'll finish on that.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Louise, I want to pick up on, Kate talked about chopping and changing. You've seen a huge amount of it over the last decade, and kind of policy environment for businesses felt like a bit of a moving target. How are your members feeling at the moment in this context? What does providing certainty look like in an external environment that is still so unstable?
So I think it's a bit of a mixed picture across business at the moment. So I think in a large part that they are really positive, particularly about the opportunities that the UK has got. And I think the government has done lots of positive things, particularly obviously mentioned industrial strategy being one of those really big ones, being really clear on a bit more what is that long-term vision, what are the races that we want the UK to be in. But they do see some of those cross-sector issues and actually the fundamentals in the UK, like have we got the right tax structure, have we got the right regulatory structure, planning comes up time and time again. Of actually, like there are some of those pain points of where businesses want to move forwards, but they are struggling with some of those things as well. I think we've done a lot of work, as you might know, even actually about the impacts of things like national insurance contribution changes and businesses moving from the highest tax level for 25 years. So I think we've all got the same vision and the same mission to that higher growth that is about more investment in improving productivity in the UK, and that will lead to higher living standards. And I think one of the key things for us is really thinking about where we have got that longer term vision. It really helps to then think about, okay, well, how can we work more in partnership together? And I think for me that is really important. Like the best examples that I see is where we have, particularly often in local areas and local settings, and I think there's important questions there about what is the Westminster versus the London governments, is where you have got local business leaders really working with education providers, working with government bodies, thinking about, okay, what can growth mean for this local area? How can we think about how we have the right skills system in this local area, so that you are making that growth and the productivity that you want to see really have that impact on people's lives.
Thank you. Mike, I want to pick up on that point around partnership that both Kate and Louise talked about. What do you see as the role of workers' voices in this? What should their role be in that partnership between business and government?
Okay, well, first of all, I have to leave about 15 minutes. No disrespect to the audience, in order to get in to see the leader's speech, I've got to queue up about 4 days beforehand, so no disrespect. So I'll keep my comments focused. The previous economic orthodoxy of a de minimis state and a penchant for deregulation got us to where we are in terms of the investment levels, both in terms of capital and in terms of people in this country, and the consequences for our infrastructure, and the need for this government to indulge in, I think they are about to talk about national renewal. Now, the challenge is that, and I can say this even though I think it's beginning to wear a bit thin for them, that the scale of the challenge they were left behind, you know, think about our railways, and to be clear about that, is so big that it drives the understandable impatience and the fact that working people still feel that there is a lack of evidence in their own pay packets that they're sharing in the government's growth ambitions. But look, the government set forth on, I think, a set of changes which they're not being given sufficient credit for yet. Industrial strategy is a real departure. It is saying the state has a role. It's saying that the state will bring together prime businesses, supply chains, the working people in them, in order to create a positive environment for long-term capitalism. what I think is interesting in our experience of a number of organisations that are working in Europe, and particularly those who have a Scandinavian background, if they're given the chance to operate in a deregulated way, they change their form of capitalism. In their home country, they have a long-term capitalism where they still make money, but they have a social democratic construct, and people have a greater sense of fairness, and the equality indexes in those countries are better. So my view has always been that capitalism is entirely adaptive. If you give them a strong but proportionate regulatory environment, they will still be successful. But working people will have more of a say and more of an opportunity. So industrial strategy in energy, in defence, and in the creative sector, where Prospect's also strong, are all pointers to the place where I think this government needs to be strong in terms of its growth and prosperity mission. I'll say a couple of other things quickly. First of all, look, I'm chair of the Domestic Advisory Group, which is part of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and that's a tripartite body bringing together unions, business and civic society. And actually, what this government is not getting enough credit for is that it has started a reset process with the European Union, which is vital. We lost 4 to 5% of GDP. People who are Prospect members back 10 years ago now nearly voted 70% to remain. And I say personally that leaving the European Union was the greatest harm that we've done to the economy and to civil society outside of war. And whilst we have to be measured, and the government obviously has a range of red lines and certain political considerations, this reset is crucial. What I find with business is that they're impatient for more. They can see the friction that's still there, they can see what the challenges are, and I think there will be a healthy pressure on the government to deliver on the common understanding on the 19th of May, but to go further where there can be a consensus to do so. Because frankly, if we're going to replace that lost GDP, it's in close alignment with the European Union. We can talk about trade deals with the rest of the world, but they're our biggest trading market by far. The ERB is vitally important. It is the most clearly progressive mechanism. I think for the DBT, I'm a non-executive DBT, so I wear a number of different hats. It's got a central mission to reduce burdens on business by about 25%. I think they need to be cautious in that regulatory approach. I do think that good regulation is a key to good business. The ERB, after all, is a re-regulatory measure. So there are some internal contradictions there between the department having a 25% deregulatory aim, but also bringing in the most at-scale changes in employment rights for a generation. What's very important, though, and I've said this elsewhere, we'll talk further to government about it, is that government are brought with employers are brought with this programme from government. It's been a bit rocky. I think it's important now to get the royal assent, but then the process afterwards in making it happen practically needs to really embrace business. But at the heart of the ERB is giving people collective voice. It's giving trade unions the opportunity to gain access and gain recognition. I think that should be done as a partnership project. I don't think the union movement will be successful in re-establish itself in the private sector in particular by having a fight with every employer. Some employers deserve it, most don't. Most employers are part of a sophisticated quality of employment, and I think what we need to look at is the best practice there, so that the government can use that as the means by saying the ERB is a positive regulatory measure. So the final thing I'll just say, exercise a bit of caution on the deregulatory mindset, but I think the government is going in the right way. The issue will be, though, the pent-up dissonance that exists amongst working people, which has developed over the last 14, 15 years, and that's their biggest challenge, and it's obviously what is a driver for reform.
Brilliant, thank you so much, Mike. And Richard, I want to come to you now to talk a little bit about kind of principles that you think should be guiding partnership between government and business, and how that feeds into Orsted's investment plans in the UK.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I suppose I'll just give a very quick introduction to Orsted because I think that's pretty helpful just to give some of the context around the comments that I'll be making. So we are a global leader in offshore wind. We are a huge investor in the UK. I think today we've invested about £20 billion or in excess of that. We have projects on both the East Coast and the West Coast. We currently generate about 7% of the UK's electricity, and with our next largest project, Hornsea 3, comes into operation, that'll go up to 10%. I think it's important to kind of flag this in the sense of at least where I'm coming from, and some of the comments that's already been made about the regulatory framework and the investment environment are absolutely crucial. These are big projects, capital intensive, and in terms of what, when we're looking at where to invest and really where the growth could be driven as well as the business. I think it's probably 4 key aspects just to quickly highlight. Let's say regulatory framework, certainty, attracting this capital is something the UK has traditionally been very, very good at. Things such as CFDs, where we compete to get a fixed price of electricity. It's an investment instrument that's been very, very effective in attracting capital and low cost of capital as well, which has ultimately been good for the consumer. Getting that capital in, providing regulatory certainty, obviously the world's an interesting place at the minute, is something that the UK should continue to do with allocation rounds, etc. But it's also about helping to deliver those projects. So even when you're awarded a contract, it's important to make sure those projects can be delivered as quickly as possible. Therefore, it's great to see a lot of the work that the government has done in the first 12 months when it comes to important things around speeding up the planning process, and things like building out the grid. You know, from our perspective, in terms of being able to connect, that's super important, as well as the businesses that obviously need that energy at the end of the day. So the investment and regulatory environment is crucial. It's also important, I think, in terms of really, harnessing and making the most of the opportunity from our perspective that the green transition presents. It's supporting the supply chain. So giving line of sight to supply chain, UK supply chain, to know it can invest is really, really important. But also some of those traditional industrial strategy levers are really, really important. So again, we very much welcome the industrial strategy that's been published. We can see investment in ports coming through, which is a really good example. Obviously, we want to see as much manufacturing capacity being delivered here in the UK. We know GB Energy, National Oil Fund, etc. That's all important. Skilled workforce, that's absolutely critical as well. Obviously, we need that in order to be able to support the supply chain and deliver the projects. So I think it's also important. Obviously, the question is about what can government do around growth and good business. But I think it is really important to recognise industry also has to play its part. We work very closely with Prospect. We've had a formal arrangement in place from 2022. Discussing things like skills and working conditions and training, health and safety, etc. is really, really important. So it is genuinely a partnership across all of these aspects. I think the other thing I'll probably sort of mention, which I think I've heard so far, is from our perspective, building big infrastructure and having it hosted in communities is something that we need to ensure that communities understand why things are being built, why do we need this grid, why are we building things in their back gardens, but also in terms of responsible developers and operators, because we're there for the long term, we're there for decades. It's making sure that when we are there, we're as least disruptive as possible. Big infrastructure obviously does have an impact, but one of the things that we can really do, and the government can do, is try to make sure that those communities are both understand, but they also benefit from hosting it. So, again, we're pleased to see the government looking into best practice around things such as community benefit funds. Obviously, we want to make sure the jobs and skills are there, build discounts, all that kind of thing. So, there's it's quite a lot there. But I think it all comes together to help us make those investment decisions.
Fantastic, thank you, Richard. Right, I'm going to try and get a few questions in before Kate and Mike need to run off. The next big test of this government is the budget coming at the end of November. What should we be looking for in the budget in this space? What are some of the priorities for growth? Kate, I'm going to come to you first then.
Quite the question. I am 3 weeks into the job and there's no way I'm going to be annoying our Chancellor by guessing what's going to be in and out of the budget. But what we're absolutely focused on is growing our economy and making sure that people feel the difference in their pockets and in their living standards. I think she talked about this so eloquently yesterday in her speech, and her passion and what drives her, and that applies every single day that she's in the Treasury, and especially in the budget, and just under pressures on working people. But also at Business Day yesterday, having really, really good conversations with some of the businesses about the challenges they're working through and how we can create that environment to make sure that we can feel growth in every single corner of our country and in all across our constituencies. So I won't be saying anything more in the budget, apologies.
I wasn't expecting to. I might just follow up though by asking a slightly different question, which is about kind of architecture. and the kind of how, I guess, of how business and government can work effectively in partnership. I think missions were supposed to be a big part of this, providing a way for government to work in concert with industry, with third sectors of society and so on, to pursue goals, including growth, but not limited to them. Do you think that that architecture is working? I mean, based on what you've seen so far, do you think the right institutions are in place to create that partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're always looking for opportunities where we can do that better and make sure that we are constantly engaging with stakeholders all across the different sectors, and DBT in particular from the Industrial Strategy Council, and how welcome the industrial strategy is for so many people all across different sectors, and how vital that is. And that's just not being created by a few people in the room. That's industry, and that's trade unions, that's everybody getting around the table and presenting their problems but providing solutions as well, and that's absolutely key for so many different areas that we're working on. And when we look to the youth guarantee, that's been set up by through the voice of young people on a panel, and actually feeding through what they see as their frustrations in our country and their problems with accessing work. And I think that's really refreshing as an approach for government, but there's always so much more we can obviously do in terms of collaboration, that social partnership work. But as an ethos into how we view our economy and our country going forwards, and that's essential in policy making. And a real priority for me, obviously, in my brief and what I'll be working on, I've talked about that quite a lot. But I think it's essential in delivering our really ambitious manifesto and making sure that we deliver it, but that it works and we do it really well and we have a legacy to be proud of in a couple of years' time.
Thank you.
I'd say two things. First of all, just remind the room that a previous Tory Prime Minister reportedly preceded the word business with a common profanity. And that is really where the Conservative Party have got to in terms of its relationship with business. So whatever expectations there are of the current government, we're starting with it at a better position. And I think, judging by some of the things I was listening to yesterday, particularly around the European space, and talking to people in an environment of reception by the European ambassador, there is a recognition that this government's trying to do some things differently. I mean, on from there, though, what I think we need to be recognising and rewarding in our fiscal decisions is patient capital. That's the key thing, because we've had too long, I think, an investment profile from certain businesses which was too short term. We need to see businesses that will invest in the UK for long term, creating UK-based jobs with a strong supply chain across the country. So, there are plenty of examples of very successful long-term capital. Everyone talks about Warren Buffett and so on, but patient capital in the investment space is necessary. And sticking with the things that they said, particularly, for example, of interest to our members around nuclear, and the Treasury not deciding that those numbers are now something they want to revisit.
Thank you. Louise.
So, I could list off quite a few of the things that we're looking for, but I probably just pick up on this theme about employment and kind of employment market at the moment. So I think that is something that we are really concerned about at the moment. We have seen vacancies in businesses fall off. We've seen a big increase in the cost of employment. And one of those big factors is obviously around the cost as well. So I think that that is something that we have supported the aim is quite for government. But actually, there is a really practical question about how do you make sure that the legislation that is being put forward is not just creating red tape for 99% of businesses who are already doing the right thing, trying to capture that 1% as well. So I think that have really good relationships. I think we've got a reset in terms of some of the ministers that are obviously responsible for that. I think we need to go much further than that. I think the announcement yesterday from the Chancellor in terms of youth unemployment is really important. Again, I think really working with the government about how they're going to bring that about practically. And I think one of the big concerns that we have at the moment is around young opportunities coming into the labour market and the graduate market as well. We've got, like I say, things like the ELB, the national living wage. We're also seeing around the changing labour market with AI coming in as well, what that means for people coming in at the bottom. So I think that's where we do really need to see that partnership between business, between government, between trade unions as well, to make sure that we're creating that right environment. And I think the second thing that I just say that on Mark's point around patient capital is, again, this is where we do really need to think about how you take that next step. It's great to have the long-term strategies, but we need to think about, okay, well, how does that translate to things Friday, we've seen again the Chancellor made a really big decision last year in the budget to actually prioritise capital spending and to not cut back that. I think that's positive. I'm very hopeful that she will continue that again. Lots of strong messages around transport and infrastructure spending her budget. We mentioned that the issues with kind of really planning, we've got to see more and more in that space as well. So I think employment, planning, infrastructure. I think the last thing I'd just say I want to pick up from this discussion is around energy costs as well. And again, I think that needs to be the big thing that we address. Obviously, the big cost for households at the moment. Really thinking about the competitiveness of businesses in the UK, particularly against the EU. We have a lot of kind of costs in the UK that are adding to bills. And I think it's important to see that kind of better framework to address those.
Let's just stick with that for a moment. What would you like to see in that space? What would you most like to see?
So I think they're going to have to say there's a lot of policy costs on energy bills, and I think we need to have a conversation about how they are paid for. They are really important because they are helping to fuel the investment that we need to see into the net zero economy. That longer term will mean that the UK has more domestic sources of energy, which is good in terms of our economic security. But if they are helping to drive improvement, those improvements are coming down the line. I think we need to think about is there a different way you can structure those payments so that you're not having all the costs up front and actually you pay for some of that as some of the benefits come online as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Richard?
I think it's obviously worth acknowledging that high energy prices are obviously a concern for some businesses. I think what I would say in the context which we touched on in terms of the way the bills are put together is probably to note that obviously we're spending a lot on infrastructure at the minute. Obviously grid, a lot of investment in renewables, but I would also sort of make the point that a lot of the countries where we're drawing comparison around energy prices are also countries that are also going through a similar transition of bringing renewables on and investing in the grid. So I suppose when it comes to the UK, the points to note, obviously the first one already is around what costs are being put onto bills, which elsewhere will be dealt with differently, perhaps more through direct taxation, for example. But also in the UK, obviously gas sets being energy prices as well, which is obviously something that can be looked into and see whether we can break that link and obviously renewables plays a part in that.
Yes, thank you. Okay, I want to open it up to questions from the audience now. Sorry, I know that you probably have some questions for the Minister, but Louise and Richard will be excellent at answering as well. So I'll take questions in groups of 3. You can let me know who you are, which organisation you're from, or which capacity you're here in. And can I ask that it is a question rather than a comment if possible? We've got one in here.
Hi, I'm James from Cooperatives UK. I'm interested in your thought about community benefit funds for infrastructure. Do you have a sense of how that could be done in a way which is genuinely empowering for communities and delivers some long-term legacy?
Hi, Joe from IPPR. Just wanted to put a question that Emma actually asked the Minister about kind of infrastructure around partnership. Just to both of you, do you feel like that infrastructure is there to facilitate partnership between government, business and the workforce? And yeah, Louise, you mentioned kind of AI, maybe that's a good example to delve into. Is there enough kind of partnership working around that kind of emerging challenge in the labour market?
Again, thank you. We've got one more in here.
Hi there, I'm Jen Harrison. I'm asking the question in my capacity as founder of a community interest company, Better Places. It's prompted by IPPR's question around partnership, because I know you mentioned in the opening remarks about aligning private interests and public good, and I'm sort of interested in kind of the growth for what question and how communities and voluntary sector partners and others can be part of that partnership, because it feels like there's some separate conversations going on, and how can we bring some of that together? I'm interested in reflections. Thanks.
Brilliant, thank you very much. 3 excellent questions. Richard, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm very happy to talk about community benefit funds by way of example as to how we work with the communities that are hosting our infrastructure. As I said before, I think this is absolutely a critical part of sort of rollout of more grid and the green transition. At Orsted, we've been doing this for many years. I think on an annual basis now, we distribute, donate £2 million per year to projects, and obviously that's around the areas where we have built these projects. It's incredibly important that we involve the communities in that, so it's not we don't decide what projects that's spent on. There's a lot of work that is done in terms of engaging the communities, understanding the projects that they want to have support for. That's been the traditional model that we've used, I say very, very successfully around the country. There are other options which are being looked into, and I think there is some discussion around that. I think in a general sense, again, it's important to the communities as to what they want. When it comes to onshore, for example, wind, we've seen build discounts. That's something that also provides a useful role. I mean, I think obviously we've been talking about there around projects which are developers contributing to funds which then get dispersed, but I'd probably sort of just finish by saying that is an element of what I think is important when it comes to kind of engaging with communities. There's just a lot of very simple things that we can do in terms of just making sure that they know why we're there and kind of engaging. And then, at a bigger scale, I mean, from our perspective, Grimsby is probably the best example of this. I mean, also we have a very large O&M centre on the east coast. We also have on the west coast as well, at Barrow, where we employ hundreds of people. I think on the east coast there's about 600 people there now. So we are, from a community perspective, we've helped to redevelop the Grimsby dock. We put a lot of investment in there, and as I said before, these projects, they're developed over a number of years. So development and construction phases can take 10 years, and then these wind farms are here for now the newest one to be around for sort of 35 years, and that provides jobs for people in local communities. So I think the Community Benefit Fund, is a really good example of something which we can highlight. I think that's also particularly important in energy. You can't have an O&M hub in absolutely every single part of the country, so I think that's particularly important. For example, like from our perspective in East Anglia, that's where we don't have our big O&M hub, so I think that's a very useful thing. But I say it is part of a wider kind of programme that we put in place to work with the communities.
Thank you. And Louise, I wonder whether you want to come in, particularly on Joe's question on whether we've got the right infrastructure in place, and also that question around private interest, public good, for the growth forward.
Yeah, sure. So I think two good points. So one, when you're thinking about partnerships, one of those examples are some of those public-private partnerships, and then we've talked also quite a lot around the benefits that come through the CFD model for things like the net zero agenda. I think we do need to think about where we can take that model and apply it to more areas, because there is quite a lot of actually private capital in the UK that wants to be invested in these things and see the benefits for everybody investing in more things like infrastructure, more things like schools throughout the UK. Is how can we set up the right model to do that? I think the government has opened the door a little bit when they put out the 10-year infrastructure plan. partnerships going, which last much longer, that they're not kind of, you know, this chop and changing from the kind of electoral cycle that was really grounded in local communities and local areas. And I think that's where you can really get the depth of these partnerships and the real value.
Thank you. Okay, another round of questions. One here.
Hi, Tom from Prospect. Something that Mike mentioned, I think, before he left, was about the kind of Scandinavian model of industrial relations and businesses, unions, and government working together. I just wondered if you can't have thoughts, I mean, particularly obviously Richard from the parent company's kind of experiences in Scandinavia, but also I think there's a part of the Human Rights Bill which talks about the kind of industrial relations framework going forward and whether you think there are things we can learn from that kind of long-term model that Scandinavian countries have, and if you think there are enough spaces really in our economy where business unions and government kind of talk together about shared challenges. I know some of those conversations have been happening, we brought together around the Employment Rights Bill and other things, but it feels like, from our perspective at least, that a lot of those kind of forums are pretty atrophied over the last kind of 20 or 30 years, and we need to re-establish some of those spaces. Obviously we've got the Industrial Strategy Council, but yeah, that's one council that has a couple of seats on it for unions, and we need more, whether it's a sector model or other things, if we need more other spaces to come back.
Fantastic, thank you. Anybody else want to ask a question? What's your so much chance? Okay, well, I'll let the room have a think, and Louise, I'm going to come to you first on scandal. Or do we need to re-establish some of those spaces?
Yeah, so I mean, I work with President at detail about the Scandi model, but I think an example of where this has worked really well in the UK, perhaps the kind of go-to example that most people use is around the national living wage posting, right? That was an example of where you brought businesses and unions together and really thought, okay, this is the aim that we're going to go for, but how do you do it in a way which you can kind of both agree on it's a sensible way to proceed? And I think that is a really good model to think about. I don't think the way in which the ELB has been introduced at the moment has followed that. So I think, like I say, there's a lot of people in the business community that can sign up to the aims of what this is trying to create. But you really do need to sit around that table and have the understanding of what are the practical impacts of the things that are being promoted. So, for example, on day one rights, I think there was a real question about, okay, what does that mean around how you can have like legitimate probation periods? And if you talk to businesses, right, if they can't have that probation period, if you're taking somebody on with that risk that you could be stuck taken to a tribunal on the kind of next day, then the people that it affects are those potentially who are furthest from the labour market, that actually business will take a risk in taking on. That is impacting those furthest from the labour market. It often impacts a lot of SMEs as well. It's a really risky decision, and if you only hire 6 people, you're taking on an extra person. That's a significant proportion of your workforce. And I think therefore you're thinking about, okay, how can we do it in a practical way so that we get the aim that we want to have, but we understand the impacts on the ground. And I think the thing that I've done in the rights bill is that those discussions haven't quite happened because we haven't brought the groups together. I think there is still a bit of time for that, but obviously we're quite far down the track as well. But I think where we understand what are the shared aims, we really understand, like I say, the impacts on the ground from both perspectives. I think that's where you get the most constructive discussion, and I'd love to see more Facebook.
Brilliant, thank you. I just really want to pick up on you mentioned kind of the national minimum wage as an example of where industry works really effectively with, well, a government brought together industry and indeed lots of other stakeholders to agree a kind of route forward. I suppose in that example, that took years, including a lot of groundwork in opposition actually before we had Labour in government. We're in a really time-constrained environment now where the government needs to make changes in people's lives immediately. How does that kind of time-constrained environment play into how government manages its relationships with industry and other stakeholders?
So I think that there's a way to do it, but really when the stakes are higher, it's even more important that they do that. And so I think that sometimes you can get in a model where you feel that if you're trying to do things through a kind of consultation lens, that you are spending a lot of time. But quite often, like we know who some of the big players and big deals in this, and that's again where national living wage was a good example where the CBI came together with the TU so we can help speak for the people that we represent, and that can help speed up some of those decisions. So I think if you've got that clear aim, I think these things can happen fast if you've got that real drive behind them. But it takes that will to do it. But it shouldn't be repetitive.
Thank you.
I think, as you can probably tell from some of my sort of opening remarks, and it is worth noting that Ørsted is actually headquartered in Denmark. But I mean, in terms of good business, working with Prospect, as I already mentioned, we've got that arrangement in place, and I think across sort of the renewable sector more generally, I think there is good cooperation, and I think we are sort of seeing that accelerating as a good, responsible, employer. We, fundamentally understand, and agree with the model that, there has to be, compromise, understanding good jobs, well-paid jobs, good working conditions, etc., etc. So I think it's, it's completely right that, we work with unions such as Prospect. We already have in the wind sector, there's a collaboration forum in place where things such as health and safety, working conditions, training, etc. is discussed. I think when it comes to the renewable sector, there is the opportunity there for long-term, skilled, well-paid jobs, which is fantastic. So I think a big part of it is also making sure that unions, industry, government are all talking about the opportunities and skills that needs to be developed. So in some ways, slightly different aspects to I think what you're highlighting there. But I think there's definitely that coordination role. Is very important. There's a fair work charter that's being discussed at the minute. Again, I think that forum is the right place, to be discussing that. There's a clean energy workforce strategy that's coming out later this year, so obviously we'll follow that with interest. But yeah, I think from a sector where we're seeing huge growth, fast growth, lots of opportunities for jobs, as I think the message is kind of coming across as it needs to be a partnership. I think from Ørsted's perspective as a big multinational, I think we're probably better placed to work with some of the legislation that might be coming through. I mean, anecdotally, I think when it comes to supply chain and SMEs, that is where there are some more concerns about what the implications might be from some of these provisions. But I think at the end of the day, and I've heard Mike talk about this before, that there needs to be compromise in terms of solutions. So when it comes to like probationary periods, etc., hopefully we can end up with what's sensible and works for employees as well as businesses that employ them.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, we've got time for just a couple more questions if there are any in the room.
Hello, Rachel Henry from IPPR. I wanted to ask a question about the relationship between business and government. As you're both representatives of kind of the business community, I'm intrigued, what do businesses want more of government? What do they think that government needs to do for them? There's a sense that there's been a dip in business sentiment, so what more do they practically want government to do? And what do you think that they can do in return? What more can we be expecting of the business community in the UK?
Thank you. And then you've got one over there.
Charles Bolton from the Ethical Trading Initiative, which is an alliance of trade unions, lots of the UK's leading retail companies and NGOs working on human rights challenges in global supply chains. It builds on the question. This has been a very helpful dialogue. Too often it feels like we experience from government a very binary discussion about regulation. Treasury, we don't want any more. Others, we're looking at it, not much consistency. Our members, so including our business members, that's in the supermarkets, a lot of the high street, Zara, Inditex, big international businesses, have just come out with consultant position. They say they all want mandatory human rights and environmental due diligence. And it's very similar to the concept of the employment rights, but it's about actually strengthening things that people know they need to do anyway, creating a fair playing field. And I'm interested in the panel's insight about how we try and turn that into a more coherent debate with dialogue with government, because it feels sometimes very binary and inconsistent in terms of the engagement we get.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Okay, so what more should government be doing, and how do we get away from the binary, which is to you first this time? Whichever one you want.
Okay, well, I'm just taking it in order. I mean, just in terms of sort of business and government working together. I suppose, I mean, I can really talk about it from the renewable sector, but I can probably highlight some of the benefits I think that the government, has managed to introduce by taking sort of a mission-led approach. I think the fact that they are trying to work across government departments and that they're trying to give us that certainty and framework to encourage the investment. I mean, obviously, I know that there's lots and lots of different businesses, and I'm sure we can sort of widen it out, but I think the thing that's fundamental from us is that partnership and long-term aspirations. I mean, we've not touched upon, I've not touched upon sort of the Clean Power 2030 targets yet. I mean, obviously there's a question around, hopefully they're hit, but I think just using that as an example, I think keeping that line of sight and the fact that the government is setting out its ambition and setting that direction of travel is super important when it comes to, let's face it, globally mobile capital. So if you want to attract, billions of pounds needed to upgrade a lot of the infrastructure that needs to be upgraded, then that's a really critical thing that the government can do. So I personally would also say more along those lines. Then in terms of the second question and looking at human rights challenges in supply chain, again, just from my business's perspective, it is a global supply chain, obviously. So in terms of due diligence, that's a very, very important thing for our sort of procurement, product line departments, going out and visiting sites, etc. I think things like the Modern Slavery Act, that's something that we, obviously by legislation, have to sign up, but it's a very good sort of foundation to build that on. But it is something that obviously we take very, very seriously. I mean, obviously doing extra jurisdiction things isn't going to be possible, but it does mean that responsible businesses, kind of have the standards to work against, and obviously at the end of the day, the best thing that we can do is move that business to a more responsible, supplier. So I think there's a lot that's already been doing, but
yeah, so I think take two questions. So firstly around what business wants to see from the government. So I think they're incredibly supportive of the growth initiative. I think that's something that we have been calling for years and years, because ultimately it's where we see we need to increase productivity in the country through greater investment, and that's where you sustainably start to increase wages and impact in terms of people. So I think lots of things we've talked about, the government is already doing well, strategy, etc. But I think not only do we need that long-term vision and stability, but we also need consistency. So I think one of the issues that we often have in businesses is where government kind of say one thing and then over here they're doing something else as well. So I think there is a bit about a lot more going on across government and to really, really kind of laser focus on this. And that was, I think, part of the point of having the kind of growth of like mission-led approach to government. I think one of the kind of examples of that is on this point around raising costs for businesses and maintenance. We spent a lot of time talking about ERB, it's a big issue. There's also a lot in the tax space, particularly thinking about obviously some of those again on the employment side increases in it. Business rates is also one of the big issues as well. When you're thinking about investment in businesses, those kind of taxes that come out before whether you're making profits or not, and business rates is particularly penalising, because if you make investments in your business, then you automatically get a higher tax bill as well. The government has for years and years promised a fundamental reform of that. We are expecting some announcements in the autumn budget, particularly for high streets, which will be really important. But actually, we need to think about the whole retail hospitality sector. We need to think about all industries as well. Actually, how do you make tax systems move in line with how businesses are performing, and think about just the market structure in relation to that as well. There's also pledges, as we say, around reducing regulation by 25%. I think in the past we've had a lot of these kind of red tape challenges of just pulling things out here and there, or kind of one in, one out policies. Again, I think we're probably in a situation where you need to think fundamentally about how you do regulation. One of the things that we advocate for is more outcomes-based regulation. So it's actually really having that conversation about what are we trying to achieve, and rather than government have like, this is a whole list of tick box things we have to do, actually think about, this is the achievement, this is the standard we expect to set, and then that also actually allows more innovation in businesses about how we can get there, because sometimes, this is where you bring in the point around technology, actually the solution to some of the challenges might not exist at the moment, so it creates that innovation,
probably going to just add just another example in terms of obviously about the high level emissions and the benefits and competing power of that, for example. But I think the government's done a huge amount of good work in the first year. Obviously, planning has been a huge part of what they're trying to achieve. But I think it's also a case of setting the objectives and also following through on it. Because we still need to see when it comes to planning, building infrastructure, actually really reducing the time frames that it takes, and that can be really simple things as well, just in terms of making sure we have appropriately qualified and a sufficient number of planning inspectors, for example, and actually really setting out the criteria by which these projects are being evaluated. This isn't about just railroading across environmental concerns or community concerns. Absolutely not. But you do need to make sure that you are backing up all of the planning reform, etc., that's coming through. So there's definitely still more work to be done. So it's the high level and the actual implementation as well.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to sneak in one more question, and then I think we're going to have to work to a close.
Yeah, hello, I'm Michael Rubenstein, Deputy Cabinet for Economy in Bury Council. About 20 years ago, there was an organisation called Northwest in Business, which had direct links with Tony Blair in his office, which provided a conduit for Northwest businesses to interact with the government. What is there now for local businesses to interact, to tell government directly what we want, rather than, I don't know how you're getting information if you are guessing, but how do we communicate?
Thank you. Okay, so how can local business interact effectively with government? Richard?
Probably not.
Do you have views?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely of a perspective, at least from our, the CBI's perspective, this is a large part of what we do of trying to be that voice for businesses. So, the way that we operate is that we, have regional offices throughout the UK to make sure that we have got that local approach as well as national, to make sure we're handling what are some of those really big issues for businesses at the moment. Really, it's quite often around this practical thing of, okay, the government has said that they want to do this, particularly, on growth and investment. What is the thing that is stopping you investing in your business? And really highlighting those things up to government. We also provide a lot of those forums for leaders to come and meet our members. And I think obviously when you're talking about engagement in that local sense, I think one of the interesting things at the moment is obviously around the development engagement of affairs and the role that they play to advocate for their communities as well. So I think it's always worth businesses engaging at that local level, but it's also thinking about where are some of those shared issues and shared concerns, and the work that we can do in particular to raise the voice of those businesses. So I think that is where there's a big role both for ourselves and kind of local trade associations as well.
Thank you. Okay, we really are hitting time now, so we're going to have to draw it to a close. Huge thank you to all four of our speakers, particularly to Louise and Richard for sticking with us to the end. Thank you to the Prospects and Northstead for making this event possible, and enjoy the leader's speech, everyone. Thank you.